Welcome back to Global Lens. France has been thrown into a fresh political crisis. Prime Minister François Bayrou has lost a crucial confidence vote in the National Assembly, defeated by 364 votes to 194. The outcome effectively forces Bayrou to present his government's resignation to President Emmanuel Macron, with the Elysée saying a decision on his replacement will be made in the coming days. This latest political shake-up means France is now heading towards its fifth prime minister in less than 2 years, a record that underscores the turbulence of Macron's second term. Bayrou's fall came after he tied his government's survival to an emergency confidence debate on public finances. He had sought backing for a plan to rein in France's ballooning deficit, nearly double the European Union's 3% ceiling, and to start addressing a towering debt load equal to 114% of GDP, the highest in the Eurozone. For Macron, the challenge now is to not just find a new prime minister, but restoring stability at the heart of Europe's second largest economy. Joining me now to discuss this further is Javed Ashraf, India's former ambassador to France. Ambassador Ashraf, thank you very much for joining us. What do you think this means for the French government and, more importantly, President Macron immediately?
Well, I think this is was something which was not a surprise at all. This was expected. There is no way that any government in the current composition of the National Assembly can bring about stability. As you know, there are three broad factions comprising a number of smaller political parties. So you've got the socialist left, New Popular Front. You've got the centrist coalition led of President Macron, and of course you have the far right coalition led by Marine Le Pen. And no one is actually ever going to come close to a majority of 289. The left front has 183, President's coalition 163, and Marine Le Pen's 143. So whoever gets elected, whoever gets nominated or appointed as the prime minister has got a Herculean task of trying to cobble together a working majority in this assembly. And one of the reasons for this is that politics in France is now highly fractured. The two dominant and rising forces in French politics are what in political vocabulary is called far right, which is Marine Le Pen's party, I think the party which is perhaps the most popular at the moment in France, and the far left, which is the LFI, or France Unbending, as if you translate that into English, of Jean-Luc Mélenchon. And that is also a very, very strong party. And in between, there is a wide array of centrist, conservative, socialist, communist parties with very small numbers. So I think we have seen the same thing happen over and over again. The problem today is that France is facing, as you've just mentioned, an extraordinary fiscal challenge. Its fiscal deficit is nearing 6% of the GDP, and its debt to GDP ratio has climbed to 114%, right, which is well above both parameters about the EU norms. Now, 44 billion euros are sought to be cut between now and 2027, 28. And I think that has become a sort of an instrument with which to force another round of National Assembly election. I don't think that immediately President Macron is going to consider that option. You know, he did dissolve the National Assembly after a poor showing in the European Parliament election in 2024 June. And in that election, his own party went down from 245, his coalition, to 143. And I think,
Ashraf, there are calls for President Macron to resign. Do you think he will do so? Next step can he take in order to put stability in the government?
First, I think he doesn't seem like the person who's going to take that decision very easily. He has continued to plow through this or plod through this process. He is quite determined to stay in office till 2027. One of his great nightmares is that he will be succeeded or handing over the keys of Elysée Palace to Marine Le Pen, who is, of course, gaining in popularity. And in some sense, it is a reflection of his own disruption of politics in France in 2017. 2017 when he broke the traditional conservative socialist divide, created a new center, which led to the splintering of the polity. Many of the socialist and the centrist Republicans came to his party, but many left for the far right and the far left. And we are seeing today the end of what one might call the Macronian era. But whether he will resign or no is a very, very difficult question. I think that is what Marine Le Pen and others want. But to force a presidential election, impeachment process can be tried, but there is no way it can succeed in the current assembly. And of course, you have an instance in the past in the diarchical system when in 1969 the father of or the founder of the Fifth Republic, President Charles de Gaulle, did resign in 1969 when there were widespread protests in Paris. If all of you remember, the 1968 Paris protest was just very, very widely covered throughout the world. So I think that today we have a situation when he is getting more and more into a dead end. But as you know, that the president in France enjoys wields a lot of power under the constitution in the Fifth Republic. He can nominate a prime minister from within the assembly or from outside. He can dismiss and dissolve the assembly.
So that brings me to my next question, Ambassador Ashraf. Who do you think could be the next prime minister, possibly the sixth one in the last few years?
You know, I think you have essentially once again back to the drawing board. Now, he is not going to certainly, let's say what he won't do. He's not going to allow, say, somebody from a national rally, Marine Le Pen's party, or her coalition to be the prime minister, something that she's also likely to decline because she wouldn't want to be set up for failure as she looks ahead to the 2027 presidential election, assuming that the election takes place on schedule and not before that. So that leaves him with either the right-wing parties. He's tried Michel Barnier and François Bayrou. Both of them failed to get anything in terms of a stable government. He could try again someone from his centrist coalition. Gabriel Attal was his favorite protege, but he also had to resign. He couldn't keep the government going. They're talking about Sébastien Lecornu, who's the current defense minister. He could try to call back Cazeneuve from the socialist side, but only on the condition that he will get the support of the Socialist Party, which he had, of course, deserted later. But there is the only way that one can see a stable government going on till 2027 will be for someone from the broad left, but with a centrist inclinations, taking over as the prime minister. But the big challenge, and there, of course, they'll have to do two things. One is that ensure that the Popular Front, which is the left coalition, will support.
Right.
And second, that the centrists will support, because between the two of them, they can cobble together a majority.
Ambassador Ashraf?
Just 2 minutes, revisiting some of the key achievements of President Macron over the past 7 years. The trouble here, of course, is that he is not likely to agree to a revision in pension reforms, tax cuts, which has actually helped the French economy in great measure, at least in terms of growth, if not in fiscal space. And the other problem will be the largest party of the left coalition, which is the LFI or Jean-Luc Mélenchon. He's not likely to support. But I think even without the LFI, a socialist centrist government with some elements of support from the Republican Party, which is the center right, can form what one might call a centrist coalition involving the conservatives, the centrist coalition of President Macron, and the moderate left parties.
Okay.
They can together form a government, but depends on whether the socialists will support one of their own.
Very, very important. And finally, Ambassador Ashraf, now when it comes to the presidential election, life beyond President Macron, and that's what a lot of investors, a lot of companies who have big stakes in France would be thinking about. If we need to think about the political future of the government there and possibly the next president, who currently is the strongest contender, according to you?
if during the last election, the France has a system of a second round. After a number of candidates enter the fray in the first round, the first two then have a runoff. And so the one who gets more than 50% obviously is the president. Last time, Marine Le Pen had 42.5% against President Macron, despite the fact that almost every other party had turned around to support President Macron. And he also admitted in 2022 in his victory speech that a large number of the votes were not for him, but against Marine Le Pen. Since then, her party, RN, has gained a lot of ground. Now, she faces a challenge. She's currently debarred from contesting elections because of a corruption case involving funds for the European Parliament, which she's fighting and she's appealing against. There are many others who would be in the fray from President Macron's party, including Gérald Darmanin. You have the very popular former Prime Minister, Edouard Philippe, who was a very serious contender. You could still have François Bayrou fancying his chance. He's always dreamt of being the president. But, this is still too early to say. I just thought of some names that came to my mind. He wants to push President Macron, would like to push either Gabriel Attal, who's now fallen out with him, or his trusted defense minister, Sébastien Lecornu, who's sort of a great bridge builder and a very, very sort of a low-key person to fight for it. But I would say that this is in 2025, it is still too early to think in terms of who would be the front runner. But most people try to think either in terms of Edouard Philippe or in terms of Xavier Bertrand, in terms of us, with some of the conservative Republicans, or Marie Le Pen, or any of her party members being quite serious contenders. But don't forget that Jean-Luc Mélenchon, from the far left, always ends up in the top three, at least in the last two elections. And so, he still fancies his chance. He will, at best, be a serious contender, in my opinion.
All right, Ambassador Ashraf, we've run out of time, but thank you so much for joining us, doing election analysis, political analysis in France for us. And you're someone who understands French politics, diplomacy, and the society very, very well. Thank you so much for joining us here on Global Lens.